Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic, let's do it. What urban legend or crazy story is your town known for? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I'm from Lower Bavaria, Germany, and there is this city, Zuling, which also has a church. Next to the church, there are two spots in the grass where nothing grows. People claim that back in the day, some guy robbed the church and killed the pastor. He fled through the window, and the moment he touched the ground outside the church, he got struck by lightning and died. Since this day, nothing has grown where he touched the ground. This spot is called Teufelsstritt, literally the devil's step. I'm not sure if it classifies as an urban legend as such, but anyway, the majority of my state truly believes an animal officially declared extinct still roams around in various parts, and sightings are still often reported. There's also some secrecy among small communities and locals who have had sightings or encounters with the animal. Yes, I live in Tasmania, and it's the Tasmanian tiger, thylacine. Supposedly in the 1800s, a young boy was separated from his family's caravan as they tried to escape the flooding creek. The boy stayed in the woods along the creek and became a hermit who would scare off any travelers who entered his domain. Eventually, he got himself trampled by horses, and now the ghosts of the Hairy Man haunt the area that Hairy Man Road now runs through. State: Pope Lick Monster, Fisherville, Kentucky. County: Crybaby Bridge, where a mom in the 70s threw two kids off a bridge for crying, and now if you go alone at night, you can still hear them crying. House: we think there's a rabid badger in the basement, but no one wants to check. St. Leonard's Forest near Horsham, West Sussex in the UK, has lots of stories surrounding it. My favorite is about the Mick Miles race. The story goes that a local man called Mick Miles was challenged by the devil to race for his soul in St. Leonard's Forest. The pair raced so fast they burned a track through the forest where to this day no trees grow. You can visit the spot. It's a popular walking route and a neat story for the area. Some people also claim to have seen a headless horseman at night on this forest stretch. In Paducah, Kentucky, there's a legend that near the Kentucky Dam there are catfish as big as a Volkswagen Bug. Story goes the divers doing work down there swore to never go back down again. Emperor Norton was some wacky dude who has gotten rich off of speculation during the gold rush in San Francisco and then lost all his money. He snapped and declared himself Emperor of the US, and I guess he became a popular local celebrity zany character. We still have people dress up like him at local events, like when the bridge reopened after Loma Prieta. Goatman's Bridge. I'm going to copy and paste what Wikipedia says about it because it's hard to explain. It's said to be haunted by a half-man, half-goat figure called Goatman. The belief is based on the legend of a black goat farmer named Oscar Washburn, who was said to have moved his family to a residence just north of the bridge. A few years later, Washburn, having become known as a dependable and honest businessman and dubbed the Goatman by locals, displayed a sign on Alton Bridge reading, "This way to the Goatman." But the success of a black man was still unwelcome to many, and in August 1938, Klansmen in the local government crossed the bridge and kidnapped Washburn from his family. They hung a noose on Old Alton Bridge, and after securing it around his neck, threw him over the side. When they looked down to see if he had died, the noose was empty. In a panic, they returned to his family home and slaughtered his wife and children. In my city, animal shelters don't house or adopt out black cats anymore because many people will go out to Goatsman Bridge to sacrifice the cats. There have been a few deaths over the past few years as pushed off the bridge. Kids have jumped off the bridge into a very shallow river and died on impact, along with kids being pushed off the bridge. There have been no signs of foul play in the deaths of those who were pushed off, though. There has been an episode regarding Goatman's Bridge from BuzzFeed Unsolved and Ghost Adventures. I recommend watching those. Funny enough, there's a trail in Goatman's area, and if you go far enough, you'll find a random couch, and that's where all the high school and college kids go to smoke weed. There's also a rundown old salon and country-like buildings on the trail too. At night, it's super creepy, and you get this sense of something's not right. The trail is very pretty though. The ghost of Proctor Park. Local legend had it that there was an armed robbery suspect who fled the scene, and the police finally cornered him in front of a concrete wall at Proctor Park. He raised his gun, and the police shot him, and he slammed up against the wall and died. On certain nights, you could look at the wall where he had been killed. You could see his silhouette on the wall. It was known as the ghost of Proctor Park. After hearing the story from a coworker, my friends and I drove over to the park one night, and we saw the haunted silhouette on the wall. We all panicked in terror and fled the scene, hoping that the ghost would not follow us. A few days later, the guy who told the story drove us back to Proctor Park during the daytime. When we got to the wall, the ghost was still there, because it was a spray-painted silhouette on the concrete wall. I could see how a spray-painted image that looks like a person at night could freak you out for sure, especially with ghost stories hanging about, but for the artist, great job. Kind of a compliment. My small southern city, which I live in, was raided one time during the Civil War, and OMG, you'd think General Sherman burned it to the ground like Atlanta got burned. The horror and the suffering the frightened townspeople went through as the dastardly Yankees raided the city, stealing and robbing. The real story, because I researched it, is that there were black Union troops guarding the railroad here from being taken over by the Confederates. The black Union troops were outmanned and nearly had to retreat until another contingent of a black unit of the Union Army routed the Confederates and ran General Nathan Bedford Forrest off. In Smyrna, Georgia, there's a covered bridge that is supposedly haunted by water babies after a bus crash years ago. And if you stop your car underneath the bridge at night, turn your lights off, and leave chocolate on top of your car, you will see chocolate hand and footprints all over your car when the light comes back on. For a while, we had a lot of people going missing while walking on the riverbank near the town proper. Logic says people fell into the river and got swept away. 1 or 2 people drowned in the river per year. However, some people really ran with it and said some forest cult in the woods was capturing people to use in sacrifices. Didn't help that deep in the surrounding woods, there were a few abandoned clusters of houses that people didn't use for pagan rituals, and there was at least one cult of sorts that was well known locally. A local drive-in movie theater still operating to this day had its screen destroyed by a tornado while people were watching the movie Twister. It is true that a tornado destroyed one of the screens at the theater, and it's also true that the movie played on that screen that night was going to be Twister. But what's not true is that it happened during the actual showing of the movie. It happened during the day, maybe around 3 in the afternoon, so it would have been too early to show any movie there. New Jersey here. The New Jersey Pinelands is home to miles of pine trees and sandy roads, but it is also home to New Jersey's most infamous resident, the Jersey Devil. Designated in 1938 as the country's only state demon, the Jersey Devil is described as a kangaroo-like creature with the face of a horse, the head of a dog, bat-like wings, horns, and a tail. For more than 250 years, this mysterious creature is said to prowl through the marshes of southern New Jersey and emerge periodically to rampage through the towns and cities. Somber Beauty by Phil Domatrowski helped protect the land of the legend, help us ensure that the forests, rivers, and swamps that inspired the legend of the Jersey Devil remain protected for future generations of believers. The most widely held belief about the origin of the Jersey Devil is that Mrs. Leeds, a resident of Estelville, was distraught when she learned she was expecting for the 13th time. In disgust, she cries out, "Let it be the devil." The story continues that the child arrived and it was a baby devil. The creature then gave a screech, unfolded its wings, and flew out into the window and into the adjacent swamp. City I grew up in, a city that was supposed to be a missile silo just out of town. Everyone always talks about the Satanists that gather there and sacrifice animals to Satan. Yes, this was the 80s. As far as I know, then only chose to that was an old decommissioned arsenal that the government kept everyone away from. Yeah, dumb bored teens who drive all over and never found a silo. The headless football player. There's an old railroad junction that's said to be haunted. The story of the death really happened. I went to school with the guy. He was 3 grades ahead of me. It was about 28 years ago. One of our football players was having some mental health issues. He fumbled a play and some people in the stands laughed at him. He stormed off the field and took off in the old railroad junction. That was a popular place for teens to hang out and drink, and it was well known that the cops wouldn't bother you out there so long as you stayed out of trouble. He got blackout drunk and passed out, leaning on the tracks. Never heard the train coming. The next morning, they found his truck, a bunch of liquor bottles, and a headless corpse. They never found his head. Legend is, if you go out there to the old junction on a crisp fall night, you'll see his ghost wandering around in the weeds, still searching for his missing head. I don't have anything to add in particular, but I do find it humorous that it seems like every town has the urban legend of the ghost kids on the railroad tracks. It's always the setup being that the kids died because they got stuck at the railroad crossing and a train hit the school bus. Every story always has the same method of testing the urban legend by stopping at the crossing and putting your car in neutral with the idea that the car will move forwards on its own, and there will be tiny handprints that appear in the back bumper of your car once you're safely off the tracks. First legend, aliens. In the subdivision that I grew up in, this happened like in the early 90s if I recall correctly. A neighbor was tending to his roosters one night and suddenly scorching footprints appeared and he was heading his way. It stopped when it reached him. No one could explain what happened, and supposedly scientists from a nearby agriculture company visited to investigate it. Following this, a few nights after or months later, a scorched circle appeared in the subdivision plaza. Just think of the plaza as one big grassy area where people can play soccer. People thought it was a prank after the weird incident, but no one wants to admit it. And they said that the way the grass burned was clean and not just some random wildfire. Second legend, ghost train. If I recall correctly, it starts in the month of October to November at 10 p.m. for a year or sometimes two ago. At 10 in the evening, dogs start to howl in a pattern. It starts at one point and ends at the other side of the subdivision. A friend, workmate, showed me where the howl would start and end. And if you were a kid or teenager back then, that would have been scary to be caught in the middle of it. It suddenly stopped by the next year, nobody knows why. To add, the house where the scorching footprints happened to still be abandoned to this day. They said the owners migrated to the U.S. but haven't sold the property. Local legend related to the airline I worked at, a Boeing 747 with the identification LVMLO, codename Malo, or Bad One in Spanish, was said to be cursed, and that a flight attendant passed away from cancer and her ghost haunted the plane. Before the plane was sent to the scrapyard, there had been reports of a flight attendant in vintage clothing pushing around a non-existent trolley through the plane. Edit. Thought I'd add another one for my Air Force base I was stationed at pre-airline work. The base was said to be haunted. When I was on guard duty, I went around checking the hotspots for the bumps in the night. I found the ghost, an effing Jack Russell Terrier-sized rat. Ponyville, Alberta. There's not much, to be honest, but we do have this stupid legend of someone drowning in Jesse Lake. Also, I have a personal belief that a hospital no longer exists, burned down twice, because it used to be something to do with the residential schools. There's no evidence per se, but both times it worked down because of an electrical thing granted. The second time, it has been run down for a few years. Not really specific to my town, but rather my state or the general Appalachian region. People believe mountain lions, we call them panthers, are alive and well in the mountains. My neighbor claimed he saw one digging through his trash. I'd like to believe it, as it would mean that the eastern mountain lion hadn't gone extinct, but I find it unlikely. State, Mako Station Light, Brown Mountain Lights, Devil's Tramping Ground. Reed's Gold Mine is reportedly haunted by the ghost of miners. City. There once was a church that was supposed to be a hotspot of paranormal activity. The activity ranges from shadow people to audible phenomena. and sometimes you would see red eyes. The church has long been torn down, and there have been no new reports. Neighborhood. My neighborhood was built on what was once farmland, and one of the houses was the old farmhouse. I had a friend whose family lived there. He reported footsteps, doors opening and closing, and also floorboards creaking. We got the shoebox murder, and on the other side of town is the lady in white. The first one also still haunts a home that is about the property. I've seen it. That was before I knew the house was in and was about that property. It's all forested. There was actually a TV show that did an episode in that house, and they found it to be true. The second one is a story many towns claim. A woman gets left at the altar. After running out of the church, she drowned herself. They say if you drive nearby the area, you can see her still wearing the flowing gown as she roams around the countryside. There's supposedly a vampire in the next town over from the town I went to college in. Sometimes in the early 90s, a dude from Transylvania died and was also buried in the town cemetery. People noticed that his grave says he was born in Transylvania, so they assumed he was a vampire. So they dug him up, put a stake through his heart, and reburied him. But some still say late at night they see a man in a blue cloak roaming the streets of Lafayette, Colorado. So our local crazy man is just peak entertainment for my small town in Florida. Everyone calls him Dr. Love. He's relatively harmless, but will make you uncomfy sometimes. We'll often see him lock his bike with a clicker, and he audibly makes the boop boop sound. Watching him argue with himself is pretty fun too. Ultimately, he's great, and people even stood up for him when he got beat up once. I don't know if my city is known for it per se, but the Lost Dutchman's gold mine is a pretty well-known legend here in Phoenix, Arizona. The full story and history of the mine vary depending on who you ask, but the official and general idea is that somewhere in the Superstition mountain range allegedly exists a forgotten and highly bountiful gold mine that was never fully stripped, effectively a lost treasure. Over the years, many people have searched for it, and many people have also died trying to find it, which has fed a sort of offshoot legend that the Superstition Mountain is protected by a spirit that kills anyone that gets too close to finding it. I worked in a castle for a year, Launstein, Germany. It has a beautiful museum. I also did guided tours there where I would tell urban legends. The most famous one in the castle is one of the death windows. In the Middle Ages, knights weren't always kind. There was a particularly nasty one living on Castle Launstein. His name was Jekko Gecko, and he was a bad robber baron. Google Translate said that's the right word. He was so nasty that he wasn't just feared all up and down on the Muglitz, the river that runs through Launstein, but up to the Elbe in Pirna and Dresden. He even kidnapped the wife and daughter of the lord of the castle in Dona, a town that's a bit down the Muglitz. Eventually, God punished him for his evil doings. His castle had tall windows, but no glass or such. It was the Middle Ages, after all. One day, he saw his little son play at one of the windows. The child reached for a flower and fell. Gecko immediately ran to the rescue to catch his child, but fell himself. The kid landed safely on a ledge, but Gecko himself fell onto a sharp, kind of giant spear that was there to protect the castle from intruders. It's told that his son became a good knight after this. You can still see the window when visiting the ruins of the old castle. Another legend's about an eagle stealing a little prince and the falconer getting it back with his falcon. That's one really dear to the people that live there.